welcome to another episode of the Life Support Podcast with me, Carl Munson, and Dr. John Briffer. How are you today, John? Auspicious
I'm
day for
very.
you, I think.
Is it auspicious? What's
Well,
auspicious? Well, Friday the
you're going
13th.
to be, well, there is that. We are recording on a Friday the 13th, and there are quite a few of them this year. But you're also going to talk about being a doctor, are you not, at your daughter's school, which is a
Oh,
great
that's right.
moment
Yeah,
in
yeah.
any
I told you
parent's
about that,
life.
didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've later this afternoon, I'm going to my daughter's school, and I'm going to speak to 3 groups. Well, actually, I don't know how much speaking I'll be doing, but basically, I've got 3 groups of sort of 15 to 18-year-olds sort of coming round,
Yeah.
and I've got half an hour with each, and I've been told that 10 minutes should be about me. I don't really like talking about myself, so I'll just rattle through that, and then a 10-minute exercise, and then 10 minutes of Q&A. So the exercise that I've come up with is to have them to think and reflect. Just think about this for a moment. Why they actually want to be doctors.
Yeah.
Now, you probably know the way that I think. What I want to hear from them is that they have a genuine desire to do some good and help people.
Yeah.
And if I don't get that, and I get anything that's about their need, then I'm going to
You're
have to tell
fired.
them.
Oh, please
Yeah.
be gentle on them. They're 15, John, for goodness sake. You can't say you're fired at this stage in their
I'm going to say
lives.
something like, have you considered a career in accountancy?
Oh, really? Okay, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to hearing how this goes, and I trust you've prepared all your Portuguese especially for this occasion. Going into Portuguese schools is great fun. I've done it. I was invited in to talk to some students, 2 occasions actually, and you get given tea and a goodie bag to go home with. I hope you get all of that treatment as well. It's a lovely
I don't think.
experience.
All I can say is the woman that's organising this is completely, in my view, disorganised.
Oh, okay.
And she's also the sort of person that seems to think that we know everything going on in her head. So I'll give you an example of this. So a note went out about this. My daughter was very enthusiastic. Yes, you should do it.
I bet.
That's
Yeah,
partly
yeah.
why I'm doing it. But anyway, but also they said this went out at the end of last year, and then there's no contact until a week before. So not, we're still working on this and blah, blah, blah. And then this note goes out. And there were 2 dates that we had to commit to, by the way, both Fridays. Good days for me, usually, because I'm not normally delivering anything on a Friday. And then she said, this is going ahead. See you at this time.
Yeah.
But there were 2 dates. And now, what date? And I wrote back and I just said, what date? It's this old person who doesn't think about what other people need to know. Does that make sense? She's sort of in her head. And all of the communications are like that. It's like pulling teeth. I don't know why I'm moaning about this.
This is going to go so well this afternoon. You're going to arrive there with a lovely, positive attitude.
I'll tell you what's going to happen. Yeah. The next year, when I probably won't be doing it and invited back, I suspect what they'll be saying is, "Oh, that went well this year, didn't it? Because last year we had people crying."
It's Dr. Briffer's session, the legendary Dr. Briffer session. Let's move on.
No, it's not going to be. No, I'm going to think about their needs, but I'm also going to. My idea is, when I told Lily this, by the way, there was this sort of sharp intake of breath because I said,
she thought it was such a good idea to bring her dad into school, and now look.
Oh dear.
It might.
I will be gentle. But I do think this is actually quite important because we've had a previous conversation, haven't we, Carl, about doctors in Portugal. And I have a pretty dim view of them. And it's for 2 reasons. One, I know these are going to sound, oh, I'm brilliant and they're all rubbish. Their clinical skills are not good at all. Okay. But secondly, and worse than this, I think their attitude stinks. In the sense that they don't really seem to care about the patient. They seem to have this God sort of complex. I'll tell you, and you do, you know what I mean? The bedside manner's really off. And what's odd about this, because you live in Portugal, the Portuguese are much softer and gentler and nicer than that generally as a population. As a group of people. I'm generalizing, but generally they're nice people, particularly in the north where you are. And yet the doctors seem to have, in my estimation, from my experience, this is a few doctors now over a few years, not for my, I'm accompanying people. And these are people and they go, oh, brilliant reputation. And I'll go in with someone and I'll just think, your attitude stinks.
Yes.
You're treating people like they're worse than you somehow, lower than you. And I hate it. Look, I'm going to get off this particular soapbox, okay?
Yeah.
And let's get on with the podcast.
But
Sorry.
it is a vestigial matter, isn't it, from the dictatorship? I think, and
What I
the
think is,
period after as well.
the thing is about the Portuguese, they're lovely people, but they're very deferential generally.
Yeah.
They don't really kick up a fuss about anything. And therefore, I think the doctors sort of get, first of all, they're a bit inadequate, because otherwise, why would you be like that? If you were confident in yourself and your ability, you wouldn't be like that. You'd be a nicer person, I think. Wouldn't be about you. It'd be about the patients. That's the first thing. But also, I think they get away with it.
Yes, and have
Now,
done for decades.
in the UK in the 50s, you might have got away with it.
Yeah.
But now you can't really get away with it, because people are a bit more, hang on a moment, that's not quite right, and I'm going to make a complaint, or whatever it is, or you can't do that. Or they might say that actually to a doctor's face, which is a good thing, okay? Because this sort of belittling, slightly bullying sort of, I said I was going to stop talking about it. Now I am going to stop talking about it. What are we talking about this week, Carl? Tell me.
We're talking about whatever this is, 5-2 versus time-restricted eating, waking in the night, insomnia, I guess, but there might be other parts to that as well, and knee health, which reminds me of the first time I could hear my knees going up the stairs, and it was a shock. Should we start with the 5-2 and time-restricted eating? What's that about?
Okay, well, these are both forms of what are now termed, and you're probably familiar with this term, Carl, even you.
Even me.
In the backwater that you live in Portugal. Intermittent fasting. You've heard this term.
Yeah, I've got that, yeah.
So this basically means going for quite long periods of time without eating very much, okay? And I can tell you a couple of things about this. First of all, the evidence broadly supports intermittent fasting for a whole variety of things, whether it's blood sugar control or body weight control or blood pressure or whatever. There's a fair amount of evidence there, if you're interested, sort of thing. But also just clinically, intermittent fasting I've found quite a useful thing. Not everyone could or should do it, Carl, as with everything. But broadly, it's a beneficial thing for people to do in terms of improving, well-being, even sleep sometimes, because a lot of individuals find that they need less sleep if they're on an intermittent fasting regime for the same level of restfulness. About an hour's less sleep, I've found, for the same level of restfulness.
Wow.
Or they feel better for the same amount of sleep, if that makes sense. Do you see? They just recover a bit better.
Yes.
Anyway, there's a whole bunch of things that happen. There's a minor detox. You might get into a degree of what's called ketosis. It's where you're basically mobilizing and metabolizing fat quite efficiently. It's not a bad thing to be able to do, by the way, to subsist.
Can I chuck in a technical term? Autophagy, is that part of this
autophagy as well? Is, and you pronounced it correctly.
Thank you. Sounds like a lyric from Bohemian Rhapsody.
That's right.
Spare him his life, it's autophagy.
So autophagy is a basic, it's like an internal spring cleaning process where your body is basically eating up, digesting, for example, damaged proteins or old cells that need to be cleared from the system. It doesn't tend to kick in until quite a few hours have passed, and I mean beyond 12 or 15, maybe, I don't know, a day and a half, and you might get into that properly. But that's not a reason not to do intermittent fasting, because there's plenty of other benefits that you might get, even if you're not provoking autophagy, basically. Anyway, it's a good thing, broadly. I'm not saying everyone should do it or can do it, as I mentioned earlier, but broadly, I'd have it as one of the more effective things that you can do around lifestyle, particularly nutrition, that can help well-being and blood work, and it probably promotes kind of a certain resilience against disease, I would imagine. But anyway, look, it's a good thing. But there's different forms of intermittent fasting.
Yes, okay. So these are
there's different forms, and there's something called alternate day fasting, where you basically eat kind of normally what you like, and then you have essentially nothing the next day, and then I don't particularly advocate that, and I don't know anyone that's ever done it, by the way. It is a thing. It's just that people don't do it. The two main forms of intermittent fasting that people actually do are something called 5-2 and something called time-restricted eating. 5-2 is basically where you eat quite a small number of calories on 2 days of the week, and it's usually about 650 calories. And then 5 days you eat sort of normally, or what you like, more or less. And then there's something called time restricted eating, where you're basically eating within a relatively narrow window each day. And a typical way that people do this, by the way, is that they sort of either delay significantly or skip breakfast entirely, and then they go from lunch to dinner and they don't eat outside of that time, which means they're often eating in, say, about an 8-hour window, which is why sometimes it's called 16-8.
Okay.
But for some people, it might be 24,
Yeah.
or it might be 15-9.
Do the math.
My maths is not great. My maths is not great. 15, or whatever it is, but something like
Yes.
that, you see. Now, in the fasting period, there are certain things you can have that don't really break the fast. Water, of course, but even black coffee, black tea, that's fine. And a lot of people, I will just tell you what a lot of people do, you know, when they're pushing out breakfast, because a lot of people aren't that hungry in the morning, they'll just have some black coffee, like a couple of cups of black coffee, some water. They get through the day, they get to lunch, they go through to dinner, and then they stop eating again and whatever. And that tends to work very well. Now, I would just say this, like both of them can work, and I've seen both of them work actually quite well. But what I have found is this, is that if someone does 5-2, they very, very rarely persist with it in the long term. It's a sort of, they get on it, it has some effect, they'll lose some weight, feel a bit better, and then they sort of go back to what they were doing. Almost always, that is, in my experience. But on the other side, with time restricted eating, almost everyone that starts it and gets benefit from it, which is most people that do it, persist with it and just keep going that way. I mean, I'm talking about forever. Do you know what I mean? They don't, I mean, they'll have odd moments when there's celebrations or they go on holiday and they drop it. Do you know what I mean? But generally, they get on it and they stay on it. There's something about it that seems to be very sustainable about it. And it doesn't have to be every day, because a lot of people, for example, are quite sort of disciplined about it in the week. And that's very often, by the way, because when people eat breakfast in the week, if they do eat it, they're eating it on their own quite often. And therefore, it's not disrupting anything. But when it gets to the weekend, it's a slightly different story. You know, if you've got a partner or family or whatever, then you might want to enjoy some breakfast with them, for example. And so they'll drop it a bit at the weekend, pick it straight up again on Monday. And a lot of people do that very, very successfully. So I would say, you know, the best regime is the one that you can do consistently, isn't it, really? It's the same with
absolutely.
energy.
That's why I think it probably works, right? The latter of the two.
That's it. And that's why I broadly, look, everyone has to find their own way. I'm not saying this is the right thing for everyone. I'm just saying, looking across the board, looking at people generally, time restricted eating, 16-8 or whatever you want to call it, is usually the way forward for people.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear from you if that's working. Which of those three? Because you mentioned three there. Even if
alternate day fasting, I've never known anyone to do that.
Okay, well, if you have done that, let us know in the chat and how that's going for you. And I can totally see why the time restricted would work better. And it reminds me of the Portuguese lifestyle, because first of all, I was thinking there's no way restricted eating is going to work in Portugal. So much of this culture is based on food. But actually, for many working Portuguese people, it is a black coffee first thing. It might be a little snack with it, a tiny little thing, but it's a light breakfast generally. And we can maybe myth bust a bit here, because it was ground into us, wasn't it? Like going to work on an egg. But breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Turns out that's some marketing hype, it would appear, from back in the day.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I know, you know, there's all these sort of conspiracy theories that turn out to be conspiracy fact in the end. There's conspiracy theory that this came from the cereal manufacturers saying, well, we've got to get people eating cereal. This is also where the 30 grams or whatever it is of fiber comes from. And the only way you can do that, by the way, if you think about it, the only way you can reach those levels of fiber that are advocated is by eating basically desiccated wheat with added sugar and salt.
Yum.
That's it. It's the only way you can do it. You know, when you start looking at these, I don't want to get cynical, but when you start looking at them, you realize, you know, the 5 a day thing also plucked out of the air, 14, 21 units. It's all, you know.
It's a book. It's a book. But not now. Not now. Okay. Let's move on to, I think, knee health. And as I said before, it shocked me the first time I heard my knees going up the stairs. And there's an expat bar around here in my part of Portugal. And we came up with a strap line where the music is louder than your knees. This is a thing, isn't it, for older people? You start to hear that crunch. And it's a very important couple of joints, isn't it, as you're going into older age?
Well, it's one of the areas that's most prone, I think, to failure. So hips, knees, sometimes ankles, But these are absolutely critically important feet. Why is that? Well, because we depend on them to a certain degree for our mobility, right? If someone's got a bad shoulder, well, they may not be able to get the mug from the top shelf of but it's not necessarily incapacitating. They may not be able, their golf swing may suffer or whatever, but they can still walk around. But once something in the legs, the lower body goes, well, now we've got a completely different set of problems. The other thing is that very often when you look at statistics, I think, about health, you'll hear about cancer and heart disease and whatever. Fair enough, diabetes, obesity, blah. All of these things can actually kill people. But what is often forgotten is that if you have a problem around your mobility, number one, that can really affect your quality of life, as can the discomfort associated with whatever is going on. And then people just end up very slowly leading more and more restricted lives and just doing less and less and less. And then they become essentially a bit housebound, even chairbound. Do you see? Now, this happens very insidiously. It's not like and because of that, I think people just, I don't know, they're not happy about it, but they put up with it because they imagine there's not much that can be done. And if the knees are bad enough, they can have some knee replacements eventually, but not till they're a bit older, whatever. Anyway, this is why we're talking about this, because actually the knees, I think, are very important. And I will tell you that I've had a sort of checkered history with knee issues myself, because I used to do a lot of running and play rugby and stuff like that. And my knees were a bit, for want of a better term, even when I was quite a lot younger, a bit creaky. And I'd have these problems where, for instance, I would wake in the middle of the night and one of my knees would have locked. I wouldn't be able to move it. Now, I think what was happening here is that there's some anatomical issues within the knee that come into play once I'm so relaxed. The knee's in a slightly different sort of position than it would be if I was in control of my body, i.e. in the waking state. And then I was noticing as well, you live by the coast as well. I live by the coast. There's good walking here, across the cliffs, basically. I was finding it much, much more difficult to go down quite steep steps. Up isn't usually the problem, by the way. It's down. Okay.
It's interesting, that, isn't it?
Because this happened a few years ago, and I'm thinking, I need to get on top of this, otherwise I'm going to be restricted in what I'm able to do.
Yes.
So I came across the work of someone called Ben Patrick, who's an American, who also goes under the moniker Knees Over Toes Guy, the Knees Over Toes Guy. And that came from this idea that, I don't know if you remember this or you're familiar with this, but there was this idea that you shouldn't, when you're doing some sort of knee exercise or any exercise, you shouldn't put your knee in front of your foot, because you're putting quite a lot of strain on the knee. So when you do a squat, you should put your bum out, for example, not put your knees forward. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Okay. And what Ben Patrick said, and by the way, this is someone who'd had some bad early injuries due to basketball, I think, principally, is no, you should be able to put your knees over your toes. You should be strong enough in the knee and muscularly to do that, which makes sense. And so that's how he got his name. But basically, he's developed a series of exercises for the whole body, actually, that help just people be strong and keep mobile and whatever. And you can see him now, I don't know how old he is, he's probably sort of late 30s, but you see him dunking basketballs and whatever. This is a guy that's had knee surgeries, all sorts of stuff. Okay. Anyway, I don't know the intimate details of the biomechanics of the knee, but having heard him and looked at him, I just thought, right, I've got to do something. I'll do that. I'll try that. Now, basically, he advises lots of different things, but I sort of pared it down to 3 specific exercises that I decided I would commit to a couple of years ago now. So there's something called split squat. So essentially, a split squat is it's like a lunge. Okay, you've got one foot out in front and the other one back, and then you're sort of hinging over that front knee. Now, you can make this a bit easier for yourself if this is difficult by putting the front leg up a bit. So you can put it on a bed, for example. Or if you get very good at it, you can actually raise the behind leg up a bit, on a stool or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, it's called a split squat. People can look at this on YouTube. They can do their own research. But anyway, split squats. There's something called the tibialis raise. So that is basically where you're leant against the wall. You take your back away from the wall, so it's only your bum hitting the wall. Your feet are, perhaps a couple of feet out from the wall, and then you lift your feet like this. There's a muscle at the front of the shin called the tibialis, which does that. That's why it's called the tibialis raise. And you do some of those. And when I started these, by the way, there's another exercise I'll tell you about. But when I started these, I found them very difficult. In fact, my right knee, which is my main problem, I couldn't really do a split squat. The knee felt a bit painful, but also weak, unstable. Like, I don't want to do this. But anyway, I persisted with it. Did the tibialis raises. I couldn't really seem to get my feet off the ground when I first started these, by the way. But then, over time, it got better. But the other thing that he recommends for the knees, there may be other things as well that I don't do, is backwards walking. And so I actually bought a €250 treadmill from Decathlon specifically just to do this, just to do backward walking on it. So what I did is I ended up working up to doing 5 kilometers per. By the way, this is not for everyone. I'm just telling people what I do. By the way, the split squats and the tibialis raises I do every day, and then every other day I do some backwards walking, and I do 5 kilometers per hour backwards at a 5-degree elevation. So I'm walking downhill, which puts a bit more strain on the knees, which you want. You want to be able to be good at that for 5 minutes, and that's it. And I just do that every other day. Okay. Anyway, what can I tell you? Basically, it has transformed my knee health. So I don't have any pain in my knee. My knees don't lock anymore. The other thing that I had would be this. I'd drive for an hour and a half, get out, go to the toilet or whatever, and I could hardly walk. I mean, literally, my knees would have seized up in that time. That's gone. Yeah. That is also gone. And I'll just give you a little anecdote. So a couple of years ago, I was at a reunion. So it was a medical school reunion thing. And there was an old friend of mine, Pete, who was there. And we were walking from the reunion to a curry house, obviously.
Yeah.
That's the
like
law.
The old days, like the old days, yeah.
And I noticed his gait, how he was walking was, he looked in a world of pain. And I happened to be walking next to his wife, who was also in a year at medical school. And I asked her, I said, what's going on with, and she said, oh, his knees are knackered and whatever, but they said they can't operate because he's too young, and blah, blah, blah. So in an offline conversation, even after my drunken haze, I contacted him and said, look, if you want any advice or whatever. Again, he just did these things, totally, again, transformed.
Did we play football in his garden once?
No, that's a different Pete. Oh, okay. That guy was called Pete, who I've had a WhatsApp from this morning. No, actually yesterday I responded. No, that's a different Pete. But I've also had this morning messages, because I'm in a small group of people from medical. But it's a sort of, it is a very, very select group of people for a very, very good reason. Right. Because the communications are not for public consumption.
I can imagine. Yes. Well, the reason I mentioned this, the idea of playing football, you need your knees for that. This sounds great. And I love the idea of, unorthodox speakers who come and challenge accepted wisdom. Yes, get your knees over your feet. I've just started doing Qigong.
A little
couple of dabbles at it. And I went to a proper class earlier this week. I absolutely love it. And I can see the same sort of potential for addressing joints and, muscular, skeletal deterioration through this very gentle exercise. I really enjoyed it because it was quite a workout, as it turned out. Just thinking I'd be like some old Chinese old guy, but it was actually quite difficult.
One of the things about Qigong, by the way, I don't know much about Qigong. I have done some, and I don't know about the next topic I'm going to introduce, but I have a feeling Qigong is also good with regard to fascia in the body, those sort of sheaths that cover the muscles, basically. And I don't know much. I'm just exploring this because I've got a friend called Leanne who's really into it. So she's an ex-dancer, choreographer. Now she's in sort of healing arts, so it's how you might describe her. She's very good. And she's very good at saying, have you looked at this? Or does this resonate with you? You know, she's one of those people, rather than you must do this.
You should
Anyway,
try this.
no, that's not her at all. But basically, she started talking about fascia, and I've had a bit of an interest in this, but how do I get into it? Anyway, so she's passed some exercises my way, which I've been doing. Maybe we'll talk about them on another pod. I'm actually free. I think I told you I was in Madrid last week, it was. And I have noticed that since I've been doing those exercises, I am much easier in my body, to the extent that I think I mentioned this previously. There was an evening event, like a gala dinner thing, and I walked to it and walked back. Because, well, partly because I'm in Madrid, I've not been there. I want to see it if I can, rather than be on a coach. But the other thing is that I'm really enjoying how my body feels when it's moving now. You see, I feel less restricted somehow.
Is this because of the Qigong exercises or the knee exercises?
They're not, well, they might be classed as Qigong. I don't know. No, this isn't knee.
Yeah.
Knees haven't hurt for a while now. No, this is to do with just a sort of, I feel like, you know, they talk about the idea of being a bit like a leopard slinking along.
Yes.
I feel much more like that than I used to, where I'd get out of bed and it's like, oh, this is not.
You'd be walking
right
like an Egyptian. Yeah. I mean, I think this is really important, because you kind of map that possible trajectory of the Western person aging, getting more and more infirm until they can't move anymore. And you've talked about some knee health, which is great there. But there's much more to it than the meccano, if you like, of the body, isn't there? And a skeleton. The skeleton is surrounded by muscles and fascia. And I think it's like esoteric stuff. To ease that up and go against its inevitable calcification and locking up. I know I'm not using the right terms, but you know, I have this sort of idea that old people get stiffer and stiffer, and that's because of the journey you describe. I think of like being more in fear, being less mobile, not being flexible, and then when they feel pain, stopping doing things instead of building strength and stamina. We kind of, our Western mindset takes us into an inevitability of infirmity, or of infirmness, or whatever the right adjective is, rather than staying flexible. And we've got a lot to learn from the East, I think, about staying flexible in a gentle way.
Yeah, you reminded me of something. Well, you're totally right about all of this. I think you described it perfectly. Leanne also sent me a video of someone dancing, and her comment was, "I'd like to be like this when I'm 90." I have a strong sense that if she makes it to 90, she may well, that she will be like that when she's 90.
Yes,
you know,
it's possible.
And now I'm thinking, well, why can't I do that when I'm, well, what, you know, because I've always thought of myself as very sort of tightly, you know, I'm typical, fairly athletic bloke, if I can just say that. So the muscles tend to be tight, didn't stretch much before rugby matches and cross-country races, or, you know, I just didn't, you know, and now, you know, well, how long am I going to let that go on for before I go, hang on, I need to change the mindset here and become more like a leopard and not so much like how I am, which is a sort of tightly wound spring. Anyway,
yes,
what's the next topic?
That tightens so much it locks up. That's what we're looking to avoid, and I think it's completely possible. And my qigong teacher, one of his inspirations, it was his grandmother, who in her old age in the kitchen, when she turned round to pick up the mug, as you said, she had to turn her whole body like this.
Oh yeah.
And he looked at that and he thought, there's probably, that doesn't have to be like that. And that's the inevitable societal path, isn't it? That's just what old people do, but it's not the same all over the world.
It's not. And it's funny you should mention that specifically, because a major component of the exercises that Deanne has given me and put me in sort of contact with, if you like, to do, are rotational.
Yeah.
Of the spine, basically, including the neck. Yeah. And it's something I could, you know, when I first started doing them, I'm like, I could have ended up, you know, a bit like, you know, do you know who Sandy Tostig is?
Yes.
you know that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's troglodyte health, isn't it? It's
yeah.
Really
and I thought, I don't want to be that person. That's not going to work for me.
Ease up and open up. And it works on every level as well, doesn't it? It's like, you know, we can be like that in our minds as well as our bodies as well, which will be a whole other area of discussion, which we don't have time for right now, because we're going to fittingly go into the night and waking in the night. You haven't called this insomnia, because I think you're talking about smaller episodes of just waking up in the night, presumably, rather than not being able to sleep at all.
Look, loads of people, I'm talking about. Maybe the majority of people wake up in the middle of the night, sometimes for obvious reasons, sometimes not so obvious. Often with men, sometimes women, they need to go to the bathroom. Waking in the night isn't the issue. It's getting back to sleep that's really the issue. But the ideal would be that you didn't do it in the first place. So very simply, maybe we'll go into this in more depth another time. One of the major reasons why people wake in the night is because of what you might call blood sugar dysregulation. So essentially, when blood sugar levels drop in the middle of the night, you'll want to correct that, because otherwise you're going to go into a coma, basically. But you can't eat, a Kit Kat or a Snickers bar because you're asleep. Yeah. So what the body does is basically release sugar from the liver. But to do that, it has to secrete certain hormones like adrenaline, also known as epinephrine, and cortisol, as stress hormones. So we basically turn on the stress response in the middle of the night. And this is sometimes related to what sometimes has been eaten at dinner. So if the meal is quite destabilizing in terms of blood sugar, then it will tend to be more likely, therefore, that you will wake in the middle of the night. And that is usually something quite carby. So if it's a pasta-based, rice-based meal, lots of potato, that sort of thing, that's, with a bit of ice cream, and, it tends to be dysregulatory. But what tends to work better for sustained sleep through the night is something more stabilizing for blood sugar. That's usually some form of protein, meat, fish, eggs, and some vegetable matter, and not too much in the way of, bread, potatoes, rice, or pasta sort of thing. Anyway, that's it in short. But anyway, let's say you wake in the night. Yeah.
Yes, it just lends itself. There's a kind of rich picture developing here that connects with intermittent fasting, right? And a kind of more conducive lifestyle, which would be to have less when you start in the day for breakfast, the biggest meal possibly being lunch, where you can indulge in those carbs. It helps you get through the afternoon if you need that. And then something light in the evening, which leans into the intermittent fasting as well. Eat earlier, eat lighter and less carby. These things are all sort of connecting with each other, aren't they, in quite a good way?
Yeah, I agree with all of that, by the way, except one thing that you said around the carbs at lunch, because normally what carbs at lunch mean for people is sandwiches.
Yep.
Yes, and they are usually not great for people who are looking to have a productive afternoon. In fact, I think I said to you once, years and years ago, you said something about what you're having for lunch, and I said, and it was bread-based, and I said, so you're not planning on having a productive afternoon then?
Yes, I think you did.
That's a sort of glib. The sort of glib.
But and everyone knows that, don't they? Yeah, and people know that immediately. You're on safe
anyway,
ground.
You're completely right. But let's get back to the waking in the night. You wake in the night. What are you going to do about it? Because often people then are starting to think about all the things that they should have said, didn't say, need to say, are going to do, need to be done, shouldn't forget. Mind. So there's a breathing exercise that I think is often very helpful for helping people get back to sleep way more efficiently than just having thoughts going around in their head. So there's, first of all, quite a strong link between the brain and our respiration, because generally when people get more alert and stressed, they breathe more quickly, and it's a sign to the brain then, if you're breathing more quickly, there's something to be stressed about. So one thing, very simple thing that often helps is to slow the breathing down. And usually we're looking for about 6 breaths per minute. So that's 10 seconds to breathe in and out. But also the out breath is more calming to the system than breathing in. So if you extend the out breath relative to the in breath, that is more calming. So let's say you breathe in for 3 and out over 7. Are you with me?
Yep.
Through the nose, and then ideally into the diaphragm, into the belly, which appears to be, again, more calming to the system than breathing from the chest. In fact, very often when people get stressed, you may have noticed this. When you've annoyed Louisa, you might find that her chest gets a bit of blotchy redness in the chest, and then the chest starts. Have you seen that before?
Yes.
I'm sure you have.
Yes,
what you're thinking, but you won't say, is daily.
Yes, I did say that under my breath. Yes, welcome to my life. I'm sure it's mutual.
Breathing from the chest, okay. Which tends to be associated with stress, actually, but breathing into the abdomen is generally more calming to the system. Not everyone can breathe into their abdomen initially, I've realized, because I've asked people to do the coaching. sessions. Can they do it? And you can put one hand on your chest, one hand on your abdomen, and you're basically, the idea is you're taking a breath in and only your lower hand is moving, really. And only actually a minority of people can do this initially, because they become chronically chest breathers, and there's a problem associated with that in itself. We'll talk about it another time. But anyway, so if you put this all together, breathing in through the nose, okay, for 3, out either through the nose or mouth, it doesn't matter very much. I think the nose is easier, so you don't have to open the mouth. Anyway, in for 3, out over 7, into the abdomen. Now that is calming to the nervous system. Specifically, it helps activate something called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is a part of the nervous system that's like the brake on the system. But the other thing it's doing is occupying your mind a bit, isn't it? Because you're thinking about your breathing and counting and whatever. And that tends to help exclude thoughts that could be keeping you awake. So just that simple exercise is, I've found, very helpful for people who wake in the night and want something to enable them to get back to sleep more efficiently. In fact, I actually ran a workshop this week, and I was doing one-to-ones in the afternoon. And I think I recommended this, of the 9 people in the group, to 3 people who had volunteered this. But this is of the ones that have volunteered. Yeah. I have problems waking in the night and not being able to get back to sleep again. Now, there may be other people in the group that had that superseded by something else that they wanted to talk. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I'm just telling you, it's very common.
Wow. All sorts of things coming to mind. We don't have a great deal of time, but I have suggested that to my kids. Focus on their breathing, the out breath, bring longer. It works. It definitely works, and has done with probably all of my kids at some point, because that's the thing when kids wake up and they're like, I can't get back to sleep. And that's a wonderful thing. Yeah. And the distraction aspect of it is very powerful. Yeah. And of course, this works best if there isn't someone snoring next to you, which we have dealt with in a different episode, one of the early episodes of the Life Support podcast. I'm sure we'll return to snoring. The funny one I've developed fairly recently, I think in the last year or so, is falling asleep, but then waking up again quite soon. That might be from having someone else in the bed. I don't know what that is, but it's really weird. Just suddenly waking up again quite soon into sleep.
There's different phases of sleep. Okay, yeah. So when you first get to sleep, you're often, inevitably in quite shallow sleep, usually REM sleep.
Yes.
Rapid eye movement sleep, where you're often dreaming, by the way. And then as the night goes on, you'll drop relatively soon, we think, but, into deep sleep. And then as the night goes on, you tend to get relatively small amounts of deep sleep and much more REM sleep. And deep sleep is more for the body, REM for the brain. What I suspect is happening here, you're going down into REM sleep and then being tripped into wakefulness from that for some reason. Yes. I don't know
what. I think you're right.
And because it's very unlikely for people, unless they are woken, like roused, like,
yes,
Lazarus, for them to come out of deep sleep. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. Sleep. Yeah. And I think what happens is I excite myself in the early dream phase. And in fact, it's coming back to me now. The other evening, just only a few nights ago, I said something out loud from my dream state and woke both of us up. Not you and me, right. John, obviously. We're not like Morecambe and Wise in the same bed.
It wasn't a female name other than Louisa, was it?
Thankfully not. What I said was something along the lines of, it's an amazing project, at the top of my voice. And I was talking to Lucy in my sleep, telling her it's an amazing project. So she woke up thinking he's still awake, telling me I've done some amazing work, which got her interest. And we were suddenly both awake from something I was saying really lucidly from my early dream sleep. But there you go, to illustrate.
There you go. There. So there's something, yeah.
Yes.
I've actually woken up from obviously shallow sleep, laughing.
Me too. I take that as
laughing
a real.
About something. Yeah.
I love that, John. I love that I've ever done that in my life, that woken up from laughing too much. Isn't that a lovely thing to be able to say and share?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rather than weeping bitterly, I woke myself up weeping bitterly about all the terrible things I'd done. No, giggling and laughing like a couple of schoolboys that we occasionally are, John. Yes. Great to talk to you today. Have a great session this afternoon. And I hope to hear in years to come that a young Portuguese doctor was inspired by a conversation they had with a British doctor who talked to me quite sternly, and he set me on the right path in medicine. Who knows?
Let's see.
Okay. Have a good weekend as well. See you next week.
And you, I say, at la próxima.